The millionaire, Henry, plastered posters on the grimy streets, each one a desperate plea for any sign of his vanished son. His heart leaped as a small girl, no older than 7, approached with hesitant steps, her eyes wide with a knowing that belied her tender years. She stared at the poster as if she had seen a ghost, a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "Sir, that boy, he lives in my house," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the city's din. What Henry would uncover next was a truth so shattering, it threatened to unravel the very fabric of his existence. Henry had once been a titan, a man who commanded the world. He'd built an empire from the ground up, fueled by relentless ambition and sweat-soaked days. His companies graced magazine covers. His life was a whirlwind of luxury trips and galas. His mansion a symbol of unbridled power. But all that glitter turned to dust the moment Lucas, his only son, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only an aching void. 1 year, 365 days of agonizing hell. Since that day, the millionaire became a ghost of his former self, a mere shell, his soul trailing behind like a broken kite. What good is all the gold in the world when the thing I love most has become like the wind, forever out of reach? He'd ask himself, each morning staring at the cold emptiness of his son's untouched bed. The silence that haunted the room was an endless, cruel sentence. That particular morning, the sun seemed to mock his grief, its rays peeking tauntingly between the steel skyscrapers as if to say the world was still perfect, still whole. Henry donned the same rumpled jacket he'd worn for the past year, the one that had long since lost the scent of expensive cologne and now reeked only of exhaustion and despair. In the back seat of his car, a small fortune's worth of posters lay folded, each bearing the bright, smiling face of the child he desperately sought. "Today, I'll go further," he murmured, starting the engine with a weary nod of his head. He drove toward the city's forgotten corners, where the streets were narrow, the walls crumbling, and life held a constant, bitter edge. There, no one recognized him. There, the millionaire was just a broken, desperate father. The pothole-ridden asphalt made the car shudder violently, and as he stepped out, a bundle of posters clutched in his hand, he tasted the familiar, bitter flavor of defeat. He walked slowly, stumbling over the shards of his own shattered memories. Each dirty, graffiti-covered wall seemed to mock his impotence, his utter inability to bring his son home. He stopped in front of a rusted lamppost, took a deep, shaky breath, and plastered another poster. The tape didn't stick properly, and he smoothed it down with trembling hands, like a man trying to mend his own fractured life. "Please, someone must know something about you, my son," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. His hands trembled, and the sound of the tearing tape mingled with the rustling of the leaves in the trees above. In that instant, he felt utterly alone, as adrift as the wind swirling around him. Suddenly, a small, curious voice chirped from behind him. "Sir, that boy lives in my house." Henry froze. His heart, which had been beating with a weary, leaden rhythm, leaped violently in his chest. He turned slowly and saw a young girl standing on the sidewalk, barefoot, wearing a worn dress that hung loosely on her thin frame, her eyes too large, too knowing for her age. What did you say?" he asked, his voice a strangled whisper. The little girl pointed a tiny, dirt-stained finger at the poster and said with disarming sweetness, "That boy lives with my mom and me." Henry felt the ground dissolve beneath his feet. For a fleeting moment, he thought he was hallucinating, his grief finally pushing him over the edge. He knelt in front of the girl, struggling to control the tremor in his hands. Are you sure about that? This boy right here?" His voice was a desperate plea, laced with a fragile sliver of hope. The girl nodded without hesitation, her eyes fixed on Lucas's smiling face in the poster. "Yes, sir. He's quiet. He draws a lot and cries at night. Sometimes he talks in his sleep. He calls someone by a name." Henry held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears. "What name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad." The girl replied innocently, unaware of the crushing weight of that single word. Time seemed to stop. Henry stumbled back, as if he'd been physically struck. A flood of images washed over him. Lucas playing in the sun-drenched backyard, his crayon drawings adorning the walls, the sound of his infectious laughter echoing through the hallways. "Oh my God," he murmured, bringing his trembling hands to his head. Do you live far from here?" he asked, desperately trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "No, it's right around the corner," she said, offering a shy smile, as if revealing a precious secret. Henry didn't know whether to believe her, to run, or to simply collapse right there on the cracked sidewalk. The world spun around him, his gaze fixed on the girl who looked at him with such unexpected tenderness and unwavering truth. He took a deep, ragged breath and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Can you take me there?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. The girl frowned thoughtfully, considering his request. "I can, but my mom might get mad." Henry leaned in closer, his eyes pleading. "Don't worry, I just want to see if it's him, nothing more." She hesitated for a long moment, then finally nodded, her gaze reflecting an innocent bravery that moved him deeply. As she started walking, the wind caught the newly plastered poster, causing it to flap gently against the lamppost. Lucas's face smiled down under the faint glow of the street light. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Henry felt the faintest flutter of hope breathing within him again. Little Amelia walked ahead, barefoot, her steps light and sure, while Henry followed a few feet behind, consumed by a swirling vortex of fear and desperate hope. His heartbeat was like a runaway drum, each thud echoing in the quiet alleys of that forgotten Brooklyn neighborhood. The houses were humble, their facades adorned with cracked walls and makeshift gates. In the distance, dogs barked, and the pungent aroma of cheap takeout food wafted from open windows. Henry, accustomed to marble hallways, bespoke suits, and fine perfumes, felt utterly out of place, almost like an intruder in this world. But nothing mattered, not the squalor, not the unfamiliar smells. If what this little girl said was true, he would gladly trade 1,000 lives just for that one reunion. "So, does he ever talk about me sometimes?" he asked, trying desperately to disguise the tremor in his voice. Amelia glanced back over her shoulder with a shy smile. "Sometimes, yeah. He talks about a park, a red swing, and a black car that made a lot of noise." Henry stopped dead in his tracks, his face paling. The red swing, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. It was the same red swing that hung in the backyard of his Upper East Side mansion. The very place where Lucas had vanished without a trace. A chilling wave washed over him, and he felt his eyes well up with tears. Oh God. It's him. It has to be him. The little girl didn't fully grasp the magnitude of his words, but she watched him with a mixture of curiosity and a certain unspoken affection. There was something in her eyes he had never seen before, a quiet strength, a resilient kind of faith. As they continued their walk, Henry struggled to contain the urge to run, to sprint towards the house and snatch his son back. And how did your mom find him? He asked in a hesitant tone. Amelia paused for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Mom said he just showed up alone one rainy day. She brought him home because he was cold and hungry. Her childish voice was pure and innocent, but each word resonated heavily in the man's mind. He clenched his fists, imagining his son lost, soaked to the bone, begging for help on the cold, unforgiving streets. And she never tried to find his parents? He pressed, his voice barely a whisper. The girl shook her head. He said he didn't have anyone anymore, that God sent him to us. Henry looked away, fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm him. God or fate, he thought, his mind a swirling mix of gratitude and suspicion. The path narrowed, the streets growing darker. At every corner, Henry's stomach twisted into tighter knots. He looked around, desperately trying to memorize every detail, as if the surroundings themselves could somehow provide clues, offer some explanation for this impossible situation. Finally, the girl pointed towards a small, dilapidated house with peeling blue paint around the windows. It's there, she said innocently. Henry stopped, his breath catching in his throat. His legs trembled, and the air felt thin, almost impossible to draw into his lungs. His heart pounded in his ears, a deafening roar. Lucas, if it's you, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia, noticing his palpable nervousness, reached out and took his hand in hers. Everything's going to be okay, sir. Promise. That simple gesture, born from the pure heart of a child, held him together by the barest of threads. When Amelia pushed open the gate, the sharp, rusty creak echoed through the alley's oppressive silence. Claire, Amelia's mother, was standing in the living room. Her gaze locked with Henry's, and for a split second, the world seemed to freeze. The woman's eyes widened imperceptibly, and her forced smile betrayed a deep, almost primal fear. Good afternoon, Henry said, his voice carefully controlled, almost cold. I think my son might be here. Claire stood frozen, her face a mask of carefully constructed composure. Then, she let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Your son? Here? You must be mistaken, sir. Amelia, her brow furrowed in confusion, intervened. But Mom, it's the boy. Before she could finish, her mother spun around sharply, her eyes flashing with a cold fury that chilled the little girl's blood. Amelia, go inside now. Henry took a step forward, his voice hardening with resolve. Please, I just want to see him. I just need to look him in the eyes. If I'm wrong, I'll leave. Promise. Claire crossed her arms, breathing deeply, trying to regain control. There's no boy here. Leave. The tension in the small room grew with every word, thick and suffocating. The girl, on the verge of tears, looked from one adult to the other, her innocent mind struggling to comprehend the escalating conflict. Mom, I'm not lying. The boy lives here, I swear. Claire grabbed Amelia by the arm and pushed her forcefully towards the house, shouting, Shut up, Amelia. The harshness of her voice echoed through the small house, a jarring sound that seemed to shatter the fragile peace of the neighborhood. Henry stood still, his face a mask of mingled indignation and unbearable pain. In that instant, he recognized the look in her eyes, the telltale sign of someone desperately hiding something. A heavy, dark secret. Why are you lying? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. What are you hiding? Claire desperately tried to maintain her firm tone, but beads of sweat were now trickling down her forehead. Don't make up stories, sir. Go take care of your own life. Henry took a step back, his throat constricting with emotion. He could hear the girl sobbing behind the half-open door, whispering, Sorry, sir, sorry. Before he could say anything further, Claire lunged forward and slammed the door shut in his face, the reverberating bang echoing through the narrow alley. Henry stood there motionless, staring at the closed wooden door, his mind reeling. His chest rose and fell rapidly, desperately trying to draw air into his lungs. She's lying, he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible. She's hiding my son. With eyes brimming with tears and a heart shattered into a million pieces, Henry slowly stepped back, the sound of the little girl's sobs echoing in his ears, a haunting melody of sorrow. The wind picked up, blowing hard, and the poster he was still clutching slipped from his grasp, flying down the narrow street. He caught it with difficulty, and when he looked at Lucas's smiling face once more, he felt a vow being born within him, a burning promise that would consume him entirely. I'll come back, he whispered, his voice filled with steel resolve, even if it costs me my life. On the other side of the door, Amelia, trembling from head to toe, clutched the same poster he had dropped. Her eyes, swollen with tears, reflected a dawning realization, a newfound understanding of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary life. For the first time, she began to doubt the woman she had always known as her mother. The sound of the door slamming shut still reverberated in Amelia's head as she ran up the creaking stairs, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. Tears blurred her vision, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She pushed open the bedroom door, and the silence inside felt heavy, suffocating. Dimness enveloped the small space, the only light filtering through a broken window, causing the tattered curtains to dance in the wind. That's when she saw him. Lucas, huddled in a corner, a worn notebook resting on his lap. His eyes wide with a familiar fear, looked up at her approach. The boy seemed fragile, thin, with unruly hair falling across his forehead and pencil smudges staining his small hands. Amelia, he murmured hesitantly, as if afraid of being discovered. Lucas, she exclaimed in a loud whisper, running towards him and dropping to her knees. Their hug was instant, desperate, a silent plea for comfort in a world that suddenly felt overwhelmingly threatening. It's all okay, I swear, the boy said, trying to console her without fully understanding the source of her tears. Mom got mad at that man downstairs. Lucas lowered his head, clutching the notebook tightly to his chest, as if it were a shield against the unknown. I heard him shout my name, and then she told me to come here and not make a sound. The fear in his voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. But Lucas, that man, he knows you. He said he's your dad. The boy's eyes flew open, and for a long moment, the silence in the room seemed to swallow them whole. My dad? He repeated, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope. I dreamed about him last night. I dreamed he was calling my name, saying he was coming for me. A chill ran down Amelia's back. Then it was true, she thought aloud, reaching out to take his hands in hers. Lucas shook his head, his brow furrowed in confusion. Mom said my dad died, that no one else would ever want me. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain, though he didn't fully understand their implications. Amelia pressed her lips together, trying to discern truth from lie in the tangled web of her mother's words. She lies sometimes, she said quietly, her gaze darting towards the closed door. But why would she lie about that? The question floated in the air like a ghost, a haunting presence that neither of them dared to confront directly. The sound of Claire's footsteps climbing the stairs sent a jolt of terror through them, and they exchanged a panicked glance. Quick, lie down, whispered Amelia, pulling Lucas towards the narrow bed. He scrambled beneath the thin covers, pretending to be asleep. The doorknob turned slowly, and Claire entered the room, her face bearing a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My loves, what was all that crying about? Her voice sounded too sweet, too contrived to be sincere. Amelia wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to regain her composure. Nothing, Mom, just a nightmare. Claire approached, gently stroked her daughter's hair, and then glanced down at Lucas, her expression unreadable. Everything okay, dear? She asked in a theatrical tone. The boy feigned waking, murmuring a barely audible, Yes, Mom. Good, she replied, forcing a smile that still didn't quite reach her eyes. I don't want any more problems. Understood? That man, he's dangerous. Promise me you won't talk to him. Amelia felt her heart tighten in her chest. But Mom, he seemed nice. He was really crying. Claire knelt down and held the girl's face firmly in her hands, her gaze intense. There are things you don't understand yet, my love. The world is cruel. Sometimes people pretend to be good. Her eyes shone with an unnerving intensity, but not with genuine emotion. Instead, they reflected a deep-seated fear. It was as if she carried a secret so devastating. It had the power to destroy everything she held dear. Now sleep. Tomorrow will be a new day. When Claire left and closed the door behind her, the silence returned to the room, dense, suffocating. Amelia turned to Lucas, her gaze fixed on the shadows that covered half of his face. Do you believe what she said? The boy asked, his voice barely a whisper. She hesitated, tracing an invisible pattern in the air with her finger. She saved me, but she also hid you. I don't know what's right anymore. The girl took a deep, shuddering breath, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. I think she's lying, Lucas. I feel it. In here. And she touched her chest, right over her heart. There was something pure in that gesture. A childish intuition that was stronger and truer than 1,000 pieces of concrete evidence. For the first time, Amelia couldn't reconcile her feelings with the image of the woman she had always known as her mother. The night fell heavy over the small room, and the distant wail of sirens mingled with the contained sobs of the two children. Amelia stayed awake, watching Lucas sleep, her mind racing, trying desperately to understand why someone would hide a child like that. Why someone would weave such a tangled web of lies. Outside, the wind rattled the broken window pane, and she whispered to herself, I'm going to find out what's going on, even if I have to lose everything in the process. The following days dragged on like an endless nightmare. Amelia could no longer look at her mother in the same way. Every smile seemed forced, every caress calculated. She watched her in silence, a silent observer, paying attention to every detail, searching for any clue that might unravel the mystery. The whispered phone calls, the hastily hidden papers, the tense glances Claire cast out the window. All these things fueled her growing unease. At night, when the house was plunged into darkness, the girl would often hear her mother pacing restlessly, opening and closing drawers as if searching for something or trying to hide something that shouldn't be seen. Lucas, in his quiet, unassuming way, seemed to sense the same pervasive unease. Why is she always so scared? He whispered one night, his voice barely audible above the wind. Amelia replied softly, because she lied to someone, and when you lie, fear never sleeps. That morning, Claire left in a hurry, her bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes filled with a barely concealed worry. I'm going to the store. You two stay here, stay calm, and don't touch anything, she said before quickly closing the door behind her. The sharp click of the lock was the signal Amelia had been waiting for. Her heart raced, her palms began to sweat. She's hiding something, she thought, her mind buzzing with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Lucas, I have to know. The boy, his eyes wide with fear, tried to dissuade her. If she finds out, she'll get mad at you. Amelia took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of fear. I can handle it. What I can't handle anymore is living with all these lies. Then, she began her search, opening cabinets, lifting rugs, checking in corners of the house she'd never even noticed before. Her mother's bedroom smelled of cheap perfume mixed with must and guilt, a strange and unsettling combination. The heavy curtains blocked almost all the light, leaving the atmosphere gloomy and oppressive. In a corner of the room, one of the floorboards was slightly loose, a small detail, but enough to spark the curiosity of an observant girl. Amelia knelt down, carefully slipped her fingers into the narrow crack, and lifted the wood, revealing a dark, dusty space beneath. Inside, nestled in the shadows, was an old notebook with a torn cover, wrapped in a faded handkerchief. She took it out cautiously, as if she were handling something sacred and forbidden at the same time. What is this? She murmured, her brow furrowed in confusion. Lucas approached her hesitantly, his gaze fixed on the yellowed pages of the notebook. When she opened it, a chill ran down her spine. The pages were filled with chaotic notes, names, dates, and numbers, all scribbled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. What a weird thing, she murmured, frowning. It didn't look like a diary, nor did it resemble a shopping list. The handwriting was rushed and erratic, as if the writer had been in a constant state of nervous haste. She ran her finger over a blurred name and kept flipping through the pages, trying to decipher their meaning. Why would she hide this? She asked, more to herself than to Lucas. The boy, confused and apprehensive, simply watched her, his silence amplifying the unsettling atmosphere of the room. There was something dark and unsettling about that notebook, something that made the air in the room feel heavier, as if the words themselves possessed a sinister life of their own. Then, amid the senseless lines and cryptic symbols, something caught her attention, a name that sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Lucas H. The girl's heart stopped for a split second, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at the boy standing beside her, then back at the paper in her hands. Look, your name is here, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of surprise and mounting fear. Lucas approached her with wide, questioning eyes. My name? What? Amelia shook her head, unable to articulate the swirling vortex of emotions within her. I don't know, but this isn't normal. Why would Mom write that? The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the frantic beating of Amelia's heart. The letters of his name seemed to glow beneath the dim light, like a sign that could no longer be ignored. Fear mingled with confusion, creating a potent cocktail of dread. There's something wrong, Lucas. I can feel it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, his eyes filled with unease and a growing sense of foreboding. What are we going to do? He asked, his voice small and lost. Amelia closed the notebook with a forceful snap, as if wanting to silence the secrets that were kept within its pages. We have to find that man. He'll know what this means. There was a waver of uncertainty in her voice, but beneath it lay a newfound bravery, born from the desperate need to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Though she didn't fully comprehend the significance of the notebook and its cryptic contents, she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that it was the key to something much bigger, something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. With trembling hands, she tore a page from the notebook and frantically copied down everything she could. Lucas's name, the nearby dates, and any other details that she could remember. The sound of the pencil scratching against the paper was like thunder in the heavy silence of the house. Lucas watched her quietly, his eyes filled with tears, his small body trembling with a silent fear. If she comes back and finds you, she won't find me, Amelia interrupted. We have to try. When she finished, she carefully folded the page and tucked it into the pocket of her dress, then returned the notebook to its hiding place, covering it with the floorboard. Her breathing was short and shallow, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Come on, Lucas. I have to find him, now. As she opened the door, the afternoon sun blinded her for a moment. The hot wind hit her face, drying the tears that were still streaming down her cheeks. She looked up at the sky, and for the first time, she felt the weight of something like destiny, an invisible force guiding her towards an unknown destination. I'm going to find him, she said to Lucas, squeezing his hand tightly in hers. Even if I get lost forever. The sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops when Amelia began to run, not daring to look back. The hot air scratched at her throat, and her heart beat in time with each frantic step. The folded page in her pocket scratched against her skin, as if the paper itself had come alive, pulsing with her fear and determination. Lucas stayed behind, watching her from the window, his gaze lost and filled with worry, his small hands trembling at his sides. Be careful, he murmured, not knowing if she could even hear him. But the girl didn't stop. There was an urgency inside her, an impulse she couldn't even fully understand. All she knew was that she had to find that man with the sad eyes, the man who had cried for the boy on the poster. The neighborhood seemed bigger than before, the streets endless and unforgiving. Amelia tripped and stumbled more than once, but she always managed to pick herself up and keep going. At every corner, she asked strangers if they knew where the man with the black car lived. Many simply shook their heads, their eyes distant and unseeing. Others looked at her with pity, their expressions conveying a silent message of hopelessness. Time seemed to mock her efforts, dragging the minutes by as if testing her resolve, pushing her to the brink of despair. When night finally began to fall, casting long, ominous shadows across the streets, an old man sweeping the sidewalk finally pointed her in the right direction. The mansion at the end of the avenue. That's where the guy who puts up those posters lives. Amelia thanked him profusely and ran off, her heart swelling with a renewed surge of hope. The mansion loomed ahead, imposing and sad at the same time. The yellowish lights that illuminated the facade reflected off the wrought iron gate, and the air seemed to hum with loneliness. Amelia stopped, her steps faltering for an instant. What if he doesn't believe me? What if I've come all this way for nothing? The fear almost overwhelmed her, threatening to send her running back to the familiar, if unsettling, comfort of her home. But then, she thought of Lucas, and the name scrawled in the notebook, and the image of her mother's face, contorted with fear and desperation. The thought gave her strength. She rang the bell once, twice, 3 times, her hand trembling with anticipation. A man in a dark suit appeared at the gate, his eyes scanning her up and down with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. What's a little girl like you doing here alone at this hour? The little one took a deep breath, trying to project an air of confidence she didn't feel. I need to see the owner of the house. It's important. It's about his son. The butler hesitated, his expression etched with doubt. But there was something so sincere, so earnest in her gaze that he finally relented and opened the gate, allowing her to step inside. When Henry entered the living room, his face bore the heavy mark of exhaustion, the toll of a year spent teetering between despair and the faintest glimmer of hope. Seeing the girl standing there, it took him a second to recognize her, his mind struggling to bridge the gap between reality and the persistent dreams that haunted his waking hours. You're the girl from the poster. Amelia nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Sir, I found something. With trembling hands, she pulled the crumpled page from her pocket and offered it to him. This was hidden in my mom's room. I don't understand what it means, but his name is here. Henry took the page, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Upon seeing Lucas's name scrawled on the paper, he felt the world spin around him. The letters seemed to dance and blur beneath his tear-filled vision. Where did you find this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. In an old notebook, hidden under a floorboard, she replied, her voice thick with sobs. I swear I'm not lying. I just felt I had to show it to you. Henry sank into a nearby chair, clutching the paper to his chest, his mind struggling to process the implications of her revelation. Those chaotic notes, the random names, the seemingly insignificant dates and figures. They were beginning to form a sinister pattern, a horrifying tapestry of deceit and betrayal. This is too serious, he murmured, his hands trembling violently. He recognized 2 of the names. They belonged to other children whose faces stared out from the missing children posters he had plastered around the city months ago. The pain he had been carrying for the past year began to transmute, slowly but surely, into a white-hot rage, a burning fury fueled by the realization that his son's disappearance might not have been a random act of fate, but something far more calculated, far more evil. And that rage, in turn, began to morph into a chilling fear, a primal dread of the unknown darkness that might have ensnared his beloved son. She's involved in this, he murmured almost voicelessly, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the room. Amelia looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain the horrifying truth to a child. It means your mother might be mixed up in something terrible. Tears began to stream down the girl's face. No, she can't be bad, she whispered, her voice a broken sob, a desperate plea, a fierce denial of the reality that threatened to shatter her world. Henry approached her and gently took her small hands in his. Listen to me, dear. Sometimes, evil doesn't wear a monster's mask. Sometimes it disguises itself as love. His gaze was gentle and compassionate, but it was also loaded with a profound and inescapable sadness, the kind of sadness that comes from knowing the depths of human depravity. The important thing is that you had courage. You saved my son, and you might save many other kids too. Amelia shook her head, her mind reeling, unable to fully grasp the enormity of the situation. I just wanted her to be good, she said quietly, her voice filled with a heartbreaking vulnerability. I know, my girl. I wanted the world to be fair, too, he replied, his voice cracking with emotion. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the soft rustling of the curtains. Outside, the wind blew gently, rustling through the leaves of the trees that lined the street. Henry stood up, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and looked at Lucas's portrait hanging on the wall, a silent promise forming in his heart. Where is he now? He asked, his voice regaining a steely resolve. In my house, in the room, she told him. I told him to hide. The girl's voice was a confession, a desperate plea for help, and a heartfelt promise, all rolled into one. Henry took a deep breath, reached for the phone on the nearby table, and made a quick call, his voice as firm and commanding as it hadn't been in a long time. Get the car ready. We're going now. Amelia watched him, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear, not knowing what would happen next, but feeling deep down, in the very core of her being, that nothing would ever be the same again. He knelt in front of her, took her small hands in his and said tenderly, You did the right thing, little one. Now leave the rest to me. I promise no one will hurt you again. Amelia, her face streaked with tears, threw her arms around him, clinging to him tightly, finding solace in the warmth of his embrace and the unwavering strength in his voice. A pure, selfless embrace, a stranger offering his entire world, unknowingly finding a new home in return. Henry closed his eyes, a fleeting sensation of destiny aligning washing over him. Let's go get my son, he whispered, a newfound steel in his voice. When he rose, his gaze had transformed. Gone was the broken man, replaced by a father, steeled to face any inferno for the child waiting for him. Night descended upon the city, a thick, suffocating veil concealing secrets and setting the stage for an unpredictable drama. Henry's car sliced through the inky streets, headlights cutting through the gloom like twin beacons of hope. The engine thrummed, an echo of his racing heart. In the passenger seat, Amelia clutched the crumpled piece of paper, her gaze lost in the darkness, eyes brimming with unshed tears. Is everything going to be okay? She asked, her voice a fragile tremor. Henry turned, his eyes filled with a tenderness and resolve that belied the fear churning within. Yes, I promise you. The words were firm, but a cocktail of fear and burgeoning hope burned in his chest. Love wrestled with the anger that intensified with every mile devoured. The car finally screeched to a halt a few blocks from the house. Henry killed the engine, took a deep, fortifying breath, and surveyed their surroundings. We're going in quietly, no noise. Okay, she whispered, her small voice barely audible. The girl nodded, holding her breath as if containing the very air around her. The night air hung heavy, as if even the wind held its breath, anticipating the unfolding events. They slipped through the rusted gate, their footsteps cautious on the damp earth. A distant dog barked, ratcheting up the tension another notch. The house loomed ahead, almost completely dark, save for a sliver of light escaping the bedroom window. Henry stopped, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered a desperate prayer. Please, just let me find him, just one more time. They entered through the back door, the hinges groaning in protest, their creak amplified in the silence. Amelia placed a finger to her lips, a silent plea for quiet. The hallway was narrow and oppressive, the air thick with the cloying odors of mildew and stale food. With each step, Henry's heart hammered against his ribs. It's there, the girl whispered, pointing to the bedroom door. He approached, his hands trembling uncontrollably, and slowly, painstakingly, turned the knob. The room was shrouded in shadows, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to freeze. On the bed, a child lay curled in fetal position, his face partially hidden by a tattered sheet. Henry took a hesitant step forward, as if afraid to shatter a fragile dream. Lucas, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open, confusion clouding his gaze as he blinked at the approaching figure. Son, it's me, Henry said, his voice cracking with relief. Lucas stared at him for a moment, then recognition dawned, a spark igniting in his eyes. Dad, he whispered, barely audible. Henry sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face unchecked. Oh God, my son, he cried, pulling the boy into a desperate embrace, clinging to him as if fearing time would snatch him away once more. Their sobs mingled, a symphony of pain and joy. Even Amelia wept, standing in the doorway, her hands clasped to her chest. I knew it was him, she murmured, smiling through her tears. But the moment of elation was fleeting. A noise from the living room shattered the fragile peace. Heavy, purposeful footsteps, the distinct sound of a key turning in the front door lock. Henry instinctively shielded Amelia behind him, cradling Lucas close. The front door creaked open, and Claire's voice echoed, cold and sharp. Amelia? Silence was the only response. Seconds later, a deep, menacing male voice reverberated through the house. Someone's here. The air seemed to thin, making it difficult to breathe. Henry's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for an escape, a plan. Amelia tugged at his arm, trembling violently. It's the man who always comes to see Mom, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Henry understood immediately. An accomplice. The bedroom door was flung open, and Claire stood there, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and desperation. What do you think you're doing here? She shrieked, her voice a raw wire. Amelia stepped forward, her voice filled with a fragile courage. Mom, what's going on? Why did that man come? And why was his name in your notebook? Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Claire took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze darting between her daughter and Henry. You want to know? Then you'll hear it all. Her voice was surprisingly steady, but laced with a disturbing blend of guilt and cynicism. I work with people who take kids. Sometimes we sell them. Other times we ask for money for them. But I couldn't hand over Lucas. The air turned viscous, heavy with unspoken truths. Henry paled, reeling from the revelation. Amelia gasped, bringing her hands to her mouth, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding before her. Mom, are you lying? The girl stammered, her voice broken. Claire shook her head slowly. No, daughter, it's the truth. He was just one more. Another case. But when I saw him so small, so lost, I couldn't do it. I brought him home. He became part of us. Henry stepped forward, consumed by a potent mix of horror and incandescent rage. You kidnapped him. You destroyed my life. Claire met his gaze, her eyes teary but strangely cold. And you? What do you know about losing? You have everything. And still you lost him because you trusted too much. Amelia dissolved into uncontrollable sobs. Mom, why did you do that? Why with him? The woman reached out, attempting to touch her daughter's face, but Amelia recoiled, shrinking away from her touch. Because I had no other choice, Claire murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The people I work with don't forgive. And when he showed up, I saw a chance to start over, to have a real family. Henry roared, his voice shattering the oppressive silence. You call that love? You stole a child. And now you try to justify it with feelings? Claire closed her eyes, her voice trembling. I love that boy more than anything. And yet I know love doesn't erase what I did. The man behind her stepped forward impatiently. Enough drama. Let's end this. Amelia grabbed her mother's arm desperately. Don't let him hurt us, please. Claire took a deep breath, her face a mask of tension, her gaze lost between her daughter and her accomplice. There's no turning back now, my love, she said softly. Henry, clutching Lucas protectively in his arms, trembled with a mixture of rage and a flicker of compassion. You could have asked for help. You could have told the truth, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Claire looked away, murmuring. The truth never saved me from anything, Henry. It only condemned me. The ensuing silence was deafening. Amelia, her face etched with horror, stumbled backward, her legs threatening to buckle beneath her. Claire wept openly now, but there was no innocence in her tears. I just wanted a son, she whispered. I just wanted to love someone who wouldn't leave me. Henry looked at her, a deep sadness washing over him. And for that, you destroyed families. Her gaze hardened once more, erecting an armor of guilt and desperation. Don't try to understand what I did. Claire's scream pierced the heavy air of the house. Get out now. She shoved Amelia and Lucas forcefully towards the door, her voice trembling, her eyes overflowing with a manic desperation. You don't want to see this. The children stumbled into the hallway, disoriented and terrified, their cries echoing in the confined space, while their mother slammed the door shut and frantically barricaded it from the inside. On the other side, the sounds of hurried footsteps and furniture being moved filled the air with panic. Amelia clung to Lucas, her face buried in his shoulder, soaked with tears. Lucas, what is she going to do? He, pale and trembling, squeezed her hand. We have to help Dad. The girl's breathing came in ragged sobs. But what if it's too late? Inside the room, Henry fought to maintain a semblance of composure. Claire, please listen to me. It doesn't have to end like this. The woman trembled, tears streaming down her face unchecked. But the man beside her, the accomplice, was no longer listening to reason. Enough words, he growled, pulling a wicked-looking knife from his pocket, the blade glinting menacingly under the dim light. You've had too much luck so far. Henry backpedaled, his gaze fixed on the deadly weapon. Think this through. This won't erase what you did. He desperately tried to appeal to whatever sliver of humanity might be left, but the man merely offered a cruel, predatory smile. It'll help me sleep better tonight. He lunged forward, swift and predatory. The sounds of the ensuing struggle reverberated throughout the house. A chair crashing to the floor, a desperate gasp. Henry managed to dodge the initial attack, shoving a chair in his assailant's path, but the blade grazed his arm. Claire, help me, he shouted, his voice tearing through the air. She cowered against the wall, her eyes wide with terror, paralyzed by fear and guilt. Blood began to seep through his shirt sleeve, staining the fabric crimson. You shouldn't have come back, the attacker snarled, relentlessly pursuing his prey. Outside, Amelia heard the escalating sounds of violence and sprang to her feet. We can't let them kill him, Lucas. The boy breathed rapidly, his body shaking uncontrollably. But, what if he hurts us? She looked at him, her eyes resolute, despite the tears streaming down her face. I'm not going to let that happen. Without hesitation, Amelia threw her weight against the door, ramming her shoulder against the wood until it splintered and finally gave way. No! Claire screamed, but it was too late. The children burst into the room. The man, caught off guard, momentarily turned his head, and that split second of distraction was all Henry needed. Get out of here, he yelled, but Amelia ignored him, running towards the attacker, leaping onto his back, and desperately trying to wrestle the knife from his grasp. Let go! She screamed with every ounce of strength she possessed. Lucas, equally brave, joined the fray, grabbing the man's arm and sinking his teeth into his wrist. The knife clattered to the floor, sliding to Henry's feet. He, bloodied but undeterred, seized the opportunity to stand and make a desperate dash for the window. In a blind, desperate leap, he shattered the glass and plunged out into the night, tumbling onto the unforgiving ground of the backyard. The sickening thud echoed like an explosion in the otherwise silent night. Claire screamed his name, rushing after him while the accomplice, enraged and struggling to free himself from the children, roared, "I'm going to kill you both!" But Amelia, fueled by adrenaline and unwavering love for her newfound family, shoved him with all her might, sending him crashing into the wall. Claire, her face contorted with fear, grabbed his arm. "Let's go. The police might come." The two fled out the back door, panting, in pursuit of the wounded millionaire who limped towards the gate. The moon illuminated the backyard, casting long, dramatic shadows, as if creating a stage for this final, heartbreaking act. And then, the piercing wail of sirens cut through the air, growing louder with each passing second. The sounds of approaching patrol cars washed over them in waves, their red and blue lights painting the house windows in an eerie, pulsating glow. Henry collapsed to his knees in the middle of the yard, exhausted and in excruciating pain, while Claire and her accomplice froze, blinded by the headlights. "Police, drop your weapons," a firm voice boomed through a megaphone. Within seconds, armed officers swarmed the property. The accomplice, attempting a last-ditch escape, was tackled to the ground with a resounding thud. Claire, defeated, stood motionless, her arms raised in surrender, her face a mask of despair. Amelia and Lucas, huddled together on the porch, watched the scene unfold, trembling with a mixture of fear and overwhelming relief. Their hearts still pounded in their chests like runaway drums. Claire glanced back at her daughter one last time, her face utterly devastated. "Amelia, forgive me." The girl wept uncontrollably, her chest heaving with emotion. "Mom, why did you do all this?" The woman didn't answer, simply lowered her head as the officers placed her in handcuffs. Henry, his shoulder soaked in blood, approached slowly and gently placed a hand on the girl's head. "It's over," he whispered, his voice hoarse and strained. "You saved our lives." The flashing lights of the patrol cars reflected in Amelia's tears, as she watched them lead her mother away. Her anguished cry filled the night air, a pure, broken sound that encapsulated pain, relief, and the cruel certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. As the police transported Claire and her accomplice away, Amelia remained silent, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the immediate chaos. The night wind rustled through her hair, and the sound of the sirens gradually faded into the distance. Henry knelt in front of her and Lucas, exhausted but filled with a profound sense of gratitude, wrapping his arms around them both in a tight embrace. "You were the light in the darkness," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Without you, I never would have found my son." Amelia sobbed silently, unable to articulate a response. That night, amidst the ruins of their shattered lives and the torrent of their tears, the innocent love of two children had faced evil head-on and, against all odds, emerged victorious. The following days dawned quieter, the air filled with an unsettling stillness. The house where the nightmare had unfolded now stood empty, haunted only by the ghosts of screams and the memories of that rain-soaked night. Henry took Amelia and Lucas back to his sprawling mansion, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, that once sterile place resonated with the sounds of life. Windows were thrown open, allowing fresh air to circulate, and sunlight streamed in, chasing away the shadows of the past. Amelia, however, seemed lost, unsure of her place in this opulent world. She looked around at the vast rooms with a bewildered expression. "This place is too big for me," she murmured, sinking onto a plush velvet couch, feeling dwarfed by her surroundings. Henry smiled gently, kneeling in front of her and taking her small hands in his. "A home isn't measured by its size, little one. It's measured by love, and you brought love back to this house." Henry's physical wounds healed slowly, but his emotional scars began to mend at an accelerated pace, nurtured by the unwavering affection of his two young saviors. Lucas, as if afraid to lose her again, rarely left Amelia's side. They played together in the sprawling backyard like siblings reunited after a long and brutal war. But sometimes, silence would descend, and Amelia would grow quiet, staring wistfully at the sky, lost in memories of her mother. Henry watched her from afar, his heart aching with tenderness. "You miss her, don't you?" he asked one afternoon, sitting beside her on the garden swing. "Yes," she replied softly. Despite everything that happened, he nodded understandingly. A daughter's love doesn't erase easily, but sometimes loving is also forgiving what you don't understand. Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder, seeking comfort in his presence. That simple gesture spoke volumes. The news of Claire's fate spread quickly. She had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and her accomplice faced an even longer incarceration for a litany of heinous crimes. Amelia received the news in silence, her expression unreadable. When Henry hung up the phone, she simply asked, "Will she be okay?" He hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. "She'll pay for what she did, but maybe, just maybe, in the end she'll find peace." That same day, the official confirmation arrived. Claire had irrevocably lost custody of her daughter. Amelia remained quiet for a long time, her gaze distant, then whispered, "I just want her to know I still love her." Henry felt a lump form in his throat and wrapped his arms around her in a tight, comforting embrace. "And that's why you're so special, Amelia, because even when you're hurting, you still know how to love." His words hung in the air, a testament to her extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and a promise of a brighter future. Days turned into weeks, and life gradually settled into a new, more peaceful rhythm. Lucas started to smile again, his eyes sparkling with newfound joy. Amelia discovered the meaning of safety and belonging, the comfort of a loving home. And Henry, for the first time in years, felt that time was no longer his enemy, but a gentle healer. One golden morning, Henry received a call from social services. "Provisional custody of the girl has been granted to you," the voice on the other end of the line announced. He was momentarily speechless, overcome with emotion. After a long pause, he took a deep, steadying breath and replied, "She was already part of my family before that." When he hung up, he glanced out the window and saw Amelia and Lucas playing among the colorful flower beds, their laughter echoing through the air. A genuine smile, a smile that the world hadn't seen in years, spread across his face. That afternoon he called Amelia into his study. She entered shyly, nervously wiping her hands on her dress. Did I do something wrong? She asked, her voice laced with anxiety. Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head reassuringly. On the contrary, you did everything right. He took her hands in his and looked directly into her eyes, his gaze filled with warmth and sincerity. Amelia, I've thought about this a lot, and if you want, I'd like you to be my daughter. The silence that followed was broken only by the melodious chirping of birds in the garden. The girl gasped, breathless, her eyes welling up with tears. Your daughter? She repeated, almost disbelieving. Yes, for real, Henry smiled, his voice thick with emotion. You taught me that family is who chooses to love you, and today I choose you. Tears streamed down Amelia's face, and she threw herself into his arms, sobbing with happiness. I choose you too, Dad. The sound of those words reverberated through the room, making time stand still. Lucas, sensing the emotional moment, ran towards them, wrapping his arms around them both. The three remained there, united, as if time had finally stopped hurting. The wind rustled gently through the leaves of the garden, and the sun shone brightly in the sky, illuminating the new life that had blossomed among them. No amount of wealth, no material luxury, no vast fortune could ever compare to the immeasurable value of that moment. Henry looked at them, his heart overflowing with love, and thought, pain tried to destroy me, but a little girl's love rebuilt me. Months later, during the formal adoption ceremony, the judge asked Amelia, do you want to keep your last name, or would you like to change it? She looked at Henry and Lucas, her face radiating joy and confidence, and replied with a smile that could light up a room. I want the same last name as theirs. And when the document was signed, a new chapter began. Not a chapter of pain and suffering, but of healing, redemption, and the enduring power of love. Henry lifted his daughter into his arms and declared, now we're a complete family. The girl hugged him tightly, burying her face in his shoulder, while Lucas laughed with pure, unadulterated joy, spinning around them in circles. And for the first time since the day his world had collapsed, Henry felt his heart at peace, because in the end, he had discovered that the deepest, most profound miracles don't descend from the heavens, but spring forth from the unconditional love of a child. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Leave a like to support us and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. That helps us keep creating the best for you. Until next time.